Okay, just wanted to put together a short intro video for our group. Welcome to Management 251, course that I refer to as OPPM, Operations, Production, Project Management. Just wanted to give you an overview of some of the things we'll likely be doing in this abbreviated semester. So I want to go through the initial PowerPoint with you and then speak to a couple of things. So let's see if the technology is with us today and we are able to share. Okay. All right, looks good. So basically, operations, project, and production management, OPPM, is kind of a hybrid mix of what used to be individual courses. We used to have, and this goes back several years, Management 251, or in its original form, Business, BUSI 251, as being operations management. And again, that had to do with the operational aspects of the firm and the mission of the firm, so on and so forth, and how they accomplished what they intended to accomplish. There was a separate course for production management, eventually merged into 251. So now we have production management, which again is the production of goods and services in its various forms and different levels and so forth. And we'll speak a little bit to that during the semester. And then project management and some of the tools and things associated with that. With all of these is something referred to, or I certainly refer to it as the triple constraint. The triple constraint. And there's a fancier way to say it, but basically it's time, specifications, and money. And again, there's a more elegant way, I suppose, to look at it or refer to it as, but all projects, all operations, all production environments are subject to this triple constraint. So again, we'll look at smaller things, we'll look at larger things, but the triple constraint, if you take nothing else from the course, the triple constraint, time, specifications, money. So we start to look at this OPPM thing, and you know, oftentimes in many textbooks refer to operations in particular, and we'd broaden that out a little bit, OPPM, I guess, but operations as being the real work of the enterprise. You know, this is what really happens. And whether we're delivering goods or services, this is what really matters. I remember looking at Porter's value chain analysis, and you had primary activities and you had secondary activities or support activities. And somewhere along the line, and I'll leave we as kind of vague right now, but we embraced the notion that these support activities were really what the firm was about. And when we look at some of these support activities, well, we're looking at research and development. We're looking at human resources management, you know, HR, and several other things. And I guess my point is that all of these very easily can be purchased services. There's nothing that requires that these things have to be done, generally speaking, within the context of the firm or the enterprise. Somewhere along the line, we started to associate support activities with the primary drivers of the firm. And from a business perspective, that's a mistake. And we'll speak to some of these things. There are other related functions, HR, again, support activity, marketing, accounting, things like this, all which can be certainly purchased services, but there are some connections to be made. So for example, from the more conventional perspective of marketing, well, the OPPM perspective on what we would typically refer to as marketing might be product design. In a traditional business environment, of course, we're used to hearing, you know, accounting and the accounting department and so forth. Well, the OPPM connection might be cost accounting because we're very conscious of that. We're trying to always maximize something or minimize something, you know, maximize profits, minimize costs, so on and so forth. We'll speak to that. We're used to things like information systems, whether it's ES, expert systems, MS, management systems, MIS, management information system. You get the point. Well, the connections there from the OPPM side might be JIT, just-in-time delivery, MRP, material resources planning, CAD/CAM, and others, TQM, and so on and so forth. Finance, we're used to hearing about finance as it relates to business and so forth. Well, the connection from finance in a more general environment or generalist viewpoint or perspective, I guess you might say, is capital budgeting, because we're very concerned in the OPPM environment about capital budgeting. And we'll speak to some of that certainly tangentially when we talk to our final deliverable. Economics, well, the relationships there might be capacity planning, supply and demand, forecasting supply and demand, so on and so forth. And then HR in a conventional sense, well, our perspective in the OPPM environment might well be design and performance measures. And you can see, even though we're not saying it specifically here, you can see in the background this triple constraint. And again, we'll speak more to that. In terms of the customer experience or consumer experience, well, rhetorical question, because I'm not really asking this at this point, certainly for us to respond to. But if we were to stop and think for a moment, what have we purchased that we can apply to, for example, the production of goods and services? And, whether it's something as simple as a Big Mac, a new car, a new computer, iPhone, whatever it might happen to be, well, what do we envision are the things involved in being able to deliver that? From the service perspective, well, it might be a visit to, I don't know, the cardiologist or the allergist or, whatever it happens to be, the orthopedist. Well, if we're visiting one of these specialists, we might well be required to have a CAT scan or an MRI or a simple X-ray. So being able to deliver those services, what's associated with that? What has to happen for that to be deliverable and be able to be monetized? And we'll speak more to that. Now, there's a writing example to illustrate a point, and typically in the classroom, I have everybody take out a piece of paper. And the first part I suggest, well, write the phrase operations management. And then we kind of look and see how long it takes. And of course, it's very quick, operations management. And then I suggest, okay, take a clean piece of paper, pull it out, write operations management, but using every other letter. So now we start O, skip the P, E, skip the R, and we time that as well. And it takes longer, typically. Then take out a third piece of paper, this time write it backwards. And that typically takes even longer. What's the point? Well, most things that we do are learned activities. And the same with writing operations, but we're used to writing it straightforward this way. We're not used to somebody saying, well, write it, but use only every other letter. That's different, requires a little bit more attention. We're not used to doing it that way, so it typically takes longer. Less letters, but it takes longer. And then writing it backwards and so forth. And the point being that, there's a learning curve to almost everything that we do. And certainly in the OPPM environment, there's very much a learning curve. And again, we'll speak to that, rather than, belabor the point today. We'll speak to that during the course. Now, this is a thing I've done that in the classroom, depending on how aggressive the group is, sometimes I've done it, sometimes I haven't. Typically what I do is I'd take the professor's stool or chair in the front of the room and I'd put the trash can in the room on top of it. And I'd have everybody in the classroom ball up 3 pieces of paper. So you have 3 basically paper balls. And I would take the first person and I'd say, okay, 3 shots, try and get it in the trash can, and one is typically way off. Second one is a little bit closer, and oftentimes the third one goes right in. Now, here's kind of the point. Sometimes, and if I stand typically fairly close to the stool with the trash can on it, all of a sudden I'm getting, paper balls thrown at me. So I learned, quickly enough that, all right, okay, let's not get the professor, let's actually do the thing. And what are we after? Well, a couple of things. One is the idea of error or deviation, and we'll speak to error during the semester. And then this idea of a learning curve again. We get better over time, and we'll speak more to that during the semester. Different things that we are probably intuitively aware of, or at least think we're aware of, that may in fact not be so. So typically I would ask, well, just in terms of our own perception of things, which country has the highest wage rate, the highest number of internet addresses per capita, the best infrastructure for internet access, the greatest number of computer programmers per capita? And we typically don't have those things at our fingertips. We think we know, and we're certainly willing to take a guess, but which country has the highest wage rate? Well, actually, it's Monaco. Now, we would be thinking, well, it's got to be one of the major industrialized countries. So it's either the US or, I don't know, maybe it's Canada these days, maybe it's China, maybe, and so we kind of run the gambit on that, and we're very surprised to find out Monaco, this little kingdom, known for tourism, gambling, and a few other things. How about the highest number of internet addresses per capita, and so forth? Um, well, Denmark, the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Ireland. Interesting. I don't think I would. I would have thought, well, China, Japan, maybe the US or something like that. Best infrastructure for internet access. How about this? South Korea. Japan as well, but South Korea. I would not have picked that. Greatest number of programmers. Well, that's an easy one, California, USA, and so forth. Anyway, I guess to drive home the point that what we think we know oftentimes intuitively may in fact not be the case. And such is the environment of OPPM. College operations. When we think about the operations, the OPPM environment for college operations. Here at the university, for example, what constitutes operations for a typical, well, you've got enrollment, clearly financial aid and admissions, academic affairs, the registrar, and a whole hierarchy of stuff. Well, how would we reconcile all of that against Porter's value chain, which I referred to earlier? Well, typically, value chain looks like this, and we've got the primary activities and subsequently the primary costs, but supplies and inbound logistics, operations, or that special human ability, that know-how, that knowledge. Remember in macroeconomics, K, L, N, E? Well, that special knowledge, that know-how, that capability. Distribution and logistics, and then, of course, sales, marketing, service, and hopefully leading to profits and so forth. But look at some of the support activities, and these are things that we oftentimes would mischaracterize and emphasize as extraordinarily important to the entity, to the organization. In point of fact, these things can be purchased services, so we don't have to do any of this internally at all. So I go out to get an MBA in HR thinking, well, I'm going to work for whomever, General Motors, Exxon. Point of fact, I may end up working for somebody like Paychex, which supports General Motors or Exxon or something like this, because they don't have to do everything internally. So we'll talk a little bit more about Porter's value chain and the value proposition through the eyes of Randy Polman in his article and book, VDM, Value Driven Management. So we'll talk a little bit about that during the semester. One of the examples I used was Marubeni, and we'll talk about that as well. I'm not going to bore you with this today. Operations strategy. Well, we realize that OPPM, specifically the operations part, although the production aspects and so forth are part of a larger organization, and it does not, or they do not operate independently. They are part of a larger entity. And so the same idea that we've been talking about in different courses about mission, vision, and the goals of the firm, objective, strategy, blah, 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 all this stuff. Well, these are not standalone entities in the OPPM environment. They support the larger strategy of the organization. And look at FedEx as an example. So the executive vice president of transportation for Federal Express decides, geez, with all the climate stuff and everything going on, you know what? I'm going to buy these small engined and battery, almost like a Prius. These small engined, almost battery operated vehicles because they're good for the environment. Okay. Arguably, but a legitimate idea. But what's the problem? FedEx is all about fast delivery and speed. Its original commercial back in the day, and you guys won't remember this with my gray hair, I do. Federal Express, FedEx, when it absolutely positively has to be there overnight. That was their commercial. In other words, speed. And that hasn't changed a whole lot. I mean, their messaging has changed a bit because their volume has, obviously grown exponentially over the decades. But here's the thing. So you're going to buy, with the best of intentions, slow trucks for a fast, speedy delivery operation? Inconsistent. And again, that should be obvious as to the hows and whys. Competitive advantage. We'll be speaking a little bit about the competitive advantage in the OPPM environment. And it pertains to all of the things that we're, speaking of. Hang on, I'm just playing with the slide thing here. And it includes everything like, competing on cost, on quality, flexibility and speed, perhaps. Other considerations may include some of the social aspects of business. And again, these are more supportive and secondary to the primary mission of the firm or the prime directive, so to speak, of the firm. We'll speak about that as well, but they may include some or all of these things. And that becomes an important part of the OPPM environment as well. Operations is the major source of sustained competitive advantage and involves obviously technology, the processes that we employ, the engineering that we do, product development, so on and so forth. And we'll pass over this for now, but basically it's the idea of everything from project production to, mass production and continuous production. And, it's typically, this horizontal line where we see the relationships between project management and make to order, batch production and made to stock or make to stock, and the idea of assemble to stock. And again, we'll plot these and speak about these going forward. Deployment versus formulation. The easy thing is sitting around a table coming up with a strategy or strategies. The hard thing is implementation, or using the word of the textbook, deployment. Formulation, relatively speaking, easy. Deployment, relatively speaking, hard. Why? Because it forces us to things that in a conversation around a conference room table, we might say, well, we can probably do a little this. And you know what, if we have to tweak it, it's okay. Well, by the time we get down here to the idea of deployment, we've got to take a stand. All of those maybes and what ifs or ifs have to go away because we're committed to pulling the trigger, making a decision on a particular item. So it forces us to take a stand. We're forced to write and speak with clarity. The abstraction goes away. Why? Because we're actually now deploying something. So it can't be a little of this and maybe a little of that, and we might this. You get the idea. So we have to wrestle with, or as it says here, tackle the details. All of this while not losing sight of the core competencies or mission of the firm. We'll talk about this assignment. Going to pass it for now. We'll discuss some other things later. And that's the intro that I wanted to speak to. Now, if you look at the syllabus, we have a few things that we're tasked to do. There are going to be 2 quick quizzes. One is going to be on forecasting. The other is going to be on we have this project management tool, PERT CPM. Well, we'll be using the critical path aspect of that. So there'll be a quiz on that. So you've got 2 quizzes. There will be some discussion board postings on Blackboard. Those you must participate in. And then you have a final deliverable. And the final deliverable is something called Betty's Bats. And it's going to incorporate optimization using Microsoft Solver, forecasting, and this idea of CPM, although we will be enhancing some of that with some of the notions of throughput and things like that. And again, as we go into the semester a little bit more, we'll speak to that. But please refer to the syllabus. It's on Blackboard. It's in the content section. Take a look at that. Pull your questions together. Start to look at some of the introductory PowerPoints. The first thing we'll be wrestling with this semester is forecasting. So start to look at some of the forecasting PowerPoints, and we will be back shortly. Enjoy the rest of your day, and blessings to all. We'll speak soon.